another episode of the Richard Lewis Show, and today we've got a very special guest, someone that I've been absolutely ecstatic to get on the show to interview. It is the award-winning journalist and documentary maker Tim Pool, whose career I have seen sort of meteorically rise over the past 12 to 18 months. So Tim, thanks very much for coming on the show. And as you are a very special guest, I'm going to let you choose how we do the questions. So I've never done that for anyone before, so I hope you realize how special you are to us all here.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, so we can either go with topicality, leading the top of the show, so the more topical stuff, which may, spoiler, involve some Kilroy questions, or we can go with the more chronology-based questions, talking about the rise of your career, and then we'll get to the topical stuff at the end. Your call.
I don't know, man. Whatever you want to do. You throw it to me, but I don't know. It's your show, so I'm going to give it right back.
All right. Very nice of you. Okay. Well, look, then, in which case we'll go with chronology.
All right, let's do it.
Because there's some stuff that's been on my mind for ages that I really wanted to talk about. And I don't know how long it'll take to sort of clear this up. But I'm not going to lie. My first awareness of you as a journalist, as a content creator, was around about that time Paul Joseph Watson threw that gauntlet down to journalists and said, look, who wants to go to Sweden on my dime, on my money? I'll pay for it, and just investigate what is going out there and see if we can clear up a few of these. Are they myths? Are they not myths? Preconceptions.
Oh, no. He was a little bit more extreme than that.
Yeah, but I'm trying to be nice about it. But yeah, I mean, specifically, his stumbling issue was the no-go zones that had sprung up, and the media sort of denied the existence of them, and he offered a challenge for any journalist to go, and you accepted that challenge. So first of all, we'll start with this whole story, which is fascinating. But did you have any sort of preconceptions? Were you a little bit worried about sort of accepting an offer from Paul Joseph Watson, this quite divisive figure?
I've been doing this for several years now, and when I cover something, the left likes, the right criticize me. When I cover something, the right likes, the left criticize me. And when I first started essentially doing journalism, I never intended to be a journalist. It was just, I produce media. I was covering Occupy Wall Street, and I got a lot of criticism from the right, calling me, a communist and all that nonsense. And it's just we're in the other end of the wave now. So now I've got the left calling me a Nazi and all that ridiculous nonsense. And it's crazy. The crazy thing to me is I don't make videos like Paul. I don't have very strong opinions politically. I don't make videos about feminism or about, I don't support Trump or anything like that. In fact, anything I've ever done that's been an opinion has been kind of lefty. I consider I'm like center left. I've been critical of Trump. I just not crazy like, the Trump, the CDC Trump news that just came out. There's just fake news all the time.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'll just leave it at that. We're on the back end. We're on the other wave now where the left is criticizing me, and I'm fully convinced in 2 or 3 years I'll have people on the right criticizing me, and it's just whatever.
Yeah, it's like a cyclical thing. But I saw it happen in real time, and it was very quick, the turnaround. Because when you first touched down in Sweden, you were walking around, you were bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, you had this great gig, this great opportunity. And at first, initially, you hadn't stumbled into these more compromised areas in Sweden, and you were saying as much. And loads of people on the left, these verified leftist journalists you get on Twitter, they were all linking to your videos, going, see, Paul Joseph Watson completely wrong. He's out of pocket to pop his little racist fantasy bubble. And then, lo and behold, you actually found her. Was it Rinkeby, if I remember rightly?
I got escorted out of Rinkeby. Here's the thing, though, right? I don't think Paul was entirely serious. I think he was being, facetious when he was like, I challenge any liberal journalist to go to Malmo, Sweden. I was actually, about a month or two before that, I was in Malmo. I was literally just there. So when he issued this challenge, I was laughing. It was me and my associate producer, Emily. And we were actually, it was early morning. We were eating breakfast, trying to figure out what story should we tackle. And he puts out this challenge, and I was like, I was literally just there. It's nothing. Like, Malmo's beautiful. So I hit him up, and I think the thing is, people on the right know that even though I've produced content that is counter to their opinions and their perspective, they think I'm being honest about, I guess I'm more rational. I'm sorry, I'm more rational and reasonable when it comes to doing interviews and listening to people like Paul. When Paul comes out and says he's not alt-right, I say, okay, end of story. But you still see all these news outlets calling him alt-right.
Yeah.
And so I think it's my attitude like that where, I'll give someone the benefit of the doubt if they say they're not and they have a history, or they're in a current wave of denouncing these people, then I'll say, okay, then there you go. That's what they're saying. And so ultimately, I think Paul was like, all right, fine, screw it, like go do it. And I actually already had a fundraiser set up. We were planning on raising $20,000 to do this. It was like a 2-week-long trip, and Paul contributed $2,000 to that. He wasn't the biggest contributor.
Right.
Most of the contributions we got came from Sweden, actually, and the biggest contribution was Swedish. It was $2,222. Okay. So Paul's number 2, but not the biggest.
Yeah, he's obviously the guy in the spotlight, right? So what did you make of kind of your time with all of that? I mean, we've talked on our show because we'll tackle topical issues as well. We've talked about this in Sweden. Look, I'm a lefty too that gets called a Nazi. It blows my mind every time it happens. But I have been to Sweden many times. I got friends in Sweden. Been to Sweden on work assignments. And I've heard my Swedish colleagues talk about these areas where it is like very hostile for people of certain faiths or, colors or whatever you want to say the issue is, to go to these areas. And they call them no-go areas. And yet apparently if you use the term no-go area, suddenly you're diving down some white nationalist talking point rabbit hole. And I don't understand that because this is a phenomenon that is absolutely real. There's no doubt about it, and your videos proved it.
I think my videos were kind of middle of the road. I mean, most of the stuff I do is, when I first went to Sweden, you had, I can't remember which website, I think it might have been Salon or Slate or something. Glenn Greenwald was tweeting out my videos. And then after Rinkeby, when the police had to escort me out because they were worried, the narrative shifted. And now you had the right-wing sites being like, journalist Tim Poolhead was forced to get escorted out. The scariest thing, okay, so I've been to a lot of places. I was in Egypt during the revolution. I was in Ukraine at the start of the Civil War. I've been to many different countries in very dangerous circumstances, right? I was accused of being a spy in Venezuela and forced to flee the country. Because I got like 12,000 messages on Twitter, and they were all like, we're going to find you, you Yankee. And it's scary stuff. The scariest thing I've ever experienced, though, look, you can have people in Venezuela accusing you of being a spy, and it's kind of funny. It's like, yeah. Look, I get people attacking me on Twitter all the time. But when I was in Sweden and the police lied about what happened, and I had video evidence refuting their statement, and then the police issued a statement where they lied about what happened. They said something like, they never told me to leave, and I followed their van out. It's all fake. And then I'm like, there's a video on Twitter I posted right when it happened. You can see them following me to my car. And then they put out another statement where they're like, oh, that was just a coincidence. Oh, yeah, we meant the van followed him, but it was just a coincidence. And then in the video I put out later on YouTube, you can see the cops turning their van, pointing at me, and then following us. And I'm like, no, there's like out of respect for the police, they asked us not to record them. I did. And then sure enough, one of the scariest things is the police are now lying. And I've got all these journalists saying I'm a liar. The same journalists that were praising me, saying, oh, he's a great journalist who's he really understands what's happening, are now calling me a liar and saying I'm fake news. And I have video proof that it's not true. But no one cares about the video proof. That's scary. And the scariest thing, I think, what made me really want to get out of the country and never go back, they had invited me onto one of their late night television programs. And this was before Rinkeby happened. I went to Rinkeby without notice. We didn't tell anybody. That was the point. We wanted to go there. We didn't want to give them time to set anything up. We just
went. Honest experience, yeah.
Yeah. And so this guy was like, hey, let's go to Rinkeby. I was like, all right. And he knew what was going to happen. This guy, his name is Shang Freak. He was like, look, man, you're going to get in trouble. And so I go on this TV show. They ask me what happened. They explain first, Tim went to Rinkeby. He claims that he had to get escorted out by the police. The police are saying he's lying and this is fake. Tim, what happened? And then I explained to them, like, well, look, the police were wrong. They claimed the van followed me, but as you can see in my video, which is online, they claimed I was following the van, but in the video I posted, you can see the van's following me. They made some other claims that were not true, and I think it's look, the people who issued a statement from the police department weren't actually there, and my videos speak for themselves. Yeah. And the lady goes, "Okay, let me translate that for you." And instead of translating what I said, she looks at the camera and says, "He told us what happened, but remember, the police said he's lying," something to that effect. And I didn't know what she said because I don't speak Swedish. Afterwards, I had people on my Twitter blows up and they're like, "Whoa, that was crazy. Like, she didn't translate your explanation of what happened." Like, obviously, younger Swedes are going to speak English. They're going to know. But the older generation aren't going to have any idea what you said. And she's just calling you a liar. So when you have the entire government, like when you have the mainstream established media in a country and the police force calling you a liar and just turning on you, I'm like, that's when it gets scary, right? Because, it's dangerous to be right in areas where the government is wrong, as the saying goes. So that's when I was like, let's start to wrap this Sweden thing up and move on. And so then we still did a couple more interviews after that. Well, you had that interview with the police officer, senior police officer, I think it was, and they were anonymous, if I'm remembering that right. And they would. We interviewed a former police officer. Who,
that was it. Sorry.
Yeah, he wasn't anonymous though. He's like a speaker and he's got a presence online. But yeah, I mean, he was showing us police statistics that there are a new phenomenon. There's a new phenomenon where young refugee children surround women, young boys and young girls, and gang assault them, to put it lightly.
Crazy.
So they know this stuff's happening. And the crazy thing that really annoyed me about the constant explanations I would get from the left in Sweden was, well, before I say this, I'll say that before I get into that, let me just say, it's not as bad as the people on the right think it is, but it's certainly not a utopia, right? When Paul was posting these photos of like flaming cars and saying like, "Oh, Malmo's so dangerous," and like Malmo's, it kind of, but you can walk around with no problems. Chicago's more dangerous, So it's relatively more dangerous, but it's not that bad. But I would still say Sweden's a messed up place. Yeah, they have their, I looked at their statistics from the website BRA, which is their official government statistics, and you can see that crime is spiking. And the craziest thing to me is that, I'm watching CNN, and Ami Horowitz is on, and Don Lemon flat out says, "You're wrong, crime isn't spiking." And Ami's like, "Well, no, look at the BRA statistics." And Don goes, "Yeah, I have them. You're wrong." And that blows my mind that Don Lemon could go on TV and lie like that. And people are going to believe him because you can go yourself, Google search BRA, Sweden, and just look and see that crime goes up. They've got their rapes are way up. And one of the things that really annoyed me about Sweden was this constant excuse they would give where they would say, "Oh, but we define rape differently." And so I actually had a guy in Sweden tell me, he goes, yes, but Tim, listen, look, Sweden defines rape differently, okay? Did you know that in Sweden, if you have sex with a woman while she's sleeping, that's rape? And I was like, that's rape in the United States.
Yeah, I was going to say that's rape everywhere, right?
Yeah, and he goes, "Oh, but also in Sweden, if you coerce someone into rape, maybe like threatening to expose them or pressuring them, that's rape." And I was like, yeah, that's rape in the United States too.
Yeah.
And so this is anecdotal, but that's something I kept hearing where people would say, "Oh, we define rape differently," and then literally define rape the same way we do. And so ultimately, I just said, you know what? Arguing whether or not you have good or bad rape is ridiculous. You have a rape problem. And they'd be like, "Well, but we define it." No. I don't care how you define it. You have a self-admitted rape problem. Okay? If you call it rape, you have too much of it. And they're like, and that's usually how we end the argument, because I can't believe people want to argue that their rape isn't as bad as our rape.
It's crazy to me. I know.
I'm like, no. You don't get to argue the on it. You can't put rape on a scale. Is it rape? Yeah. Yes. Okay. You've got too much. Period. And that's crazy that, the left is defending Sweden by trying to lessen the word rape, and that blew my mind. I'm like, I don't know. That's one of the things I just couldn't get over. It's like either it's rape and you call it rape and you have too much of it, or don't call it that. I don't know what you want me to say, but it's really high, and we hear. I mean, I can't go a week without hearing some horrifying story on Twitter. Yeah, and it blows my mind. When I was just out to dinner with some friends, it was my friend's birthday, and they're all far lefties, and they were talking about how they wanted to move to Sweden. They were like, "Oh, they're passing this tax reform, the healthcare is going to get hit. I'd love to go to Sweden." And I was like, "Well, Sweden's got economic problems." And they're like, "No, it doesn't. Sweden's perfect." And I'm like, whoa. Like, Sweden officially announced they're bringing in migrants because their economy is in trouble and they need to expand the labor force, otherwise it can't support itself. I'm like, that's from the Swedish government, and yeah, the government, when I was there, issued a report on Uppsala that there was a gang of refugee children essentially gang assaulting women in the city center, and they warned women to stay away. And even just recently, they put out
I saw that warning that just went out recently about a woman got raped by 4 individuals, and they said if you're 17 or under, stay out of this area, and then they retracted it, right?
Exactly. So, it's interesting because the neighboring countries, Norway, for instance, they do have crime statistics that show a correlation between migration, refugees, and crime. I think people on the right are a little too worried. Sweden's really bad, but Sweden's problems aren't from their current refugees for the most part. And this is one thing that I'm proud to say came out of my reporting, but I wish more people would understand. Rinkeby wasn't Syrian refugees or Afghani or Iraqi refugees. They were the children of Somali migrants who came 20 years ago. And what happened was when these people moved to Sweden, Sweden just essentially puts them in a corner and doesn't allow them to integrate. In my opinion, okay, I think Sweden is extremely racist, and they hide behind this veil of we're not racist. They're like, oh, we're a feminist country and we're anti-racist. But we interviewed this woman, a white woman from the United States, who said she couldn't get a job anywhere because she wasn't a native Swede. That it wasn't just maybe it's not racist, but culturist. That they're like, even if you can speak Swedish, if you're not fluent with the perfect accent, they don't want to hire you. So what happens when they bring in tens of thousands of Somali refugees and migrants and then say, no one's going to give you a job? Well, they go and form their own little enclaves where they can be near each other and work with each other because it's their only option. When their kids grow up, their kids are called migrants. The people in Sweden actually referred to these kids in Rinkeby as migrants, even though they were born in Sweden and they are 100% Swedish citizens. And then when those kids go visit family overseas in other countries, they're called Swedish. So they're migrants in Sweden and Swedish outside of the country. What happens? Well, they're stateless citizens essentially, and so they form gangs. They can't get jobs. What do? They hang out in Rinkeby all day and get territorial, and they get angry at the press because the press repeatedly, makes them look bad. And it's this, it's cyclical. The press makes them look bad. They get mad at the press. Then when the press gets, attacked by them, then they look bad. There was a journalist that we interviewed, and I don't know if we used this clip, but after we interviewed him, he said, "I don't understand why everyone's shocked that you were chased out of Rinkeby." He told us he personally went to Rinkeby just wearing normal clothes, not there with a camera or anything, and someone threatened to shove a gun up his, and that's just him on a normal day. Nice. And they were calling him a cop and things like that. And actually, like a week or two before I went there, a photographer got assaulted in Rinkeby. And so he says to me, I was like, I can't believe they're acting like you're not telling the truth. I mean, what happened to you is not even a big deal. The cops asked you to leave. So what? Just like last week, some guy got beat up, has camera destroyed. He's like, I went there and I got assaulted too. So, they got to protect their narrative, I guess. But I never want to go back. No,
I got a couple of questions about that. I mean, first up, right, talked about your point about ghettoization. Ghettoization is an issue that's kind of as old as time. I mean, America, for example, you think about all the big cities there, New York, you can see the waves of almost history by looking at sort of ghettoization and disbursement of certain groups of people. The Irish that built the city, and then obviously the Italian Americans and whatnot. And I used to live in Birmingham, where it was the same thing. The Irish built that city, and then they were kind of replaced by Asian immigrants, a wave of Asian immigration that spiked in sort of the 80s, because we didn't just have them coming from Asian countries like India. We also had them coming from Uganda when Idi Amin kicked everybody out, and because they were technically British, it was part of the British colonies. We had to give them somewhere to stay. But it's never a problem that's ever been sort of beaten anywhere. I still see it to this day when I go back to the UK. There's areas where you just know you're going to see more of a certain type of person, and English might be spoken as a second language in that area. And I don't have any issues with this. I mean, I hear like Londoners say stuff like, well, it's disgusting, isn't it? They come over here, they don't speak English. I think, who gives a fuck, honestly? But but by the same token, you're right. I don't see anybody sort of reaching out to these communities and saying, well, how can we help? I used to work for a local government program in Birmingham it was Enterprising Communities was the name of it. I know that sounds terrifyingly Orwellian. It was quite benign. But what it did was it took European loan money and gave it to immigrants to help them start their own businesses and kind of feel more connected to the region. So is there a way to beat that problem, or is this just something about, human nature, that when you are in a new country, a new city, a new area, and you're put with your own people, you're going to kind of retain your own identity rather than trying to, for want of a better word, assimilate, which I think is a very loaded term,
Well, this is something I was told by a few politicians in Sweden. It used to be that if you were coming into Sweden as a migrant, you could go wherever you wanted. And so what happens is everybody wants to be by people who speak the same language, and it forms enclaves. But now they as I was told, this was almost a year ago now, they had changed the law so that people who were coming into the country had to live in certain areas so that they could spread the population out across the entire country and help people integrate. Because, look, when everyone comes in and just forms their own little private enclave, they're never going to speak Swedish. They're not going to find jobs. And so you need to find a community that can take in a certain amount of people and find jobs for them so they can become Swedish. And I guess that's what they're doing now. So that's, if that's still happening, I don't know, but that's a lot smarter.
And the other question that I have sort of off the back of the Swedish reportage that you did is, why do you feel it's so important for the authorities, the government, the police, all these, mainstream groups to lie and protect this narrative? Because, I don't see how anyone benefits from that. Every time they tell a lie, they embolden the extreme right wing. They give them the ammunition.
It's really simple, though. They've publicly stated if they need to bring in more workers to support the economy. If people don't like the crime that they're seeing, they're going to reject this, and they're going to refuse new migrants. So the government, the police, the media have to maintain a narrative that there is no crime, that everything's fine. Otherwise, their economy collapses. Right? They're between a rock and a hard place, and I think they're facing a cultural problem, mostly due to the fact that they're not replacing themselves. Right? I believe the birth rate in Sweden is something like 1.2 or less. I could be wrong, but I know it's less than replacement, which would be 2. Right? 2 adults have 2 kids, and you're at stasis. 2 adults have 3 kids, and now you're expanding. And what's happening to a lot of European countries, not just Sweden, is that people they're not replacing themselves. In which case, there's a phenomenon that happens, right? I'll use Detroit as a good example so that people can understand this. Let's say you build water infrastructure that spreads across the entire city. That's a fixed cost. That means, let's just say every year it costs $1 million to maintain this water delivery system, regardless of how many people live in the city. If in 20 years you have 20% less people, well, that cost is fixed. It has to be spread out among the people. So this is why Detroit and, more importantly, Flint have such high water costs. As people flee the city of Detroit, the cost to send water to these outside, suburbs and cities stays the same, but with less people, they have to pay more for it. Eventually, you're gonna face an infrastructure collapse, where if you have a city where your water system costs $1 million per year, and you got 1 million people, so they're each paying $1 per year, that's no big deal. But if you go down to 100,000 people, now everyone's costs just went up tenfold. You go down to 1,000 people, now people are like, I just flat out can't afford that. And so what happens is, as the fixed costs per individual go up, more people leave, causing the prices to keep going up, and that's when the collapse happens. Eventually, you'll end up with a city that's totally empty because nobody can afford to pay $500 per month for water. So Sweden, other parts of Europe, places in the United States are going to deal with this unless they bring in migrants, because people don't replace themselves. So this is why we're seeing such strong migration in Europe, because for whatever reason, Western civilization has reached a point where people just don't want to have kids. There's a million reasons people speculate. I mean, my dad had 2 kids by the time he was in his late 20s, and here I am on the cusp of turning 32 in a couple of months, and I'm not married. I got no kids. So this is a phenomenon that's going to be bad for our economy. And I think governments they're all going to turn to migration, right? The U.S. is going to do it. Europe's already doing it. Sweden's been doing it for a while. And that's going to be devastating for traditionalists who believe in American culture or Western culture, because government's got to find people somewhere, and they're going to come with their own culture.
Are you ever worried about broaching this subject? Because, I've seen some very dodgy videos online about, the great replacement. I mean, first up, I'll just say this, like, I don't care sort of what the future looks like in terms of demographic shifts. Like, I just have no strong feelings about that. And, I see a lot of people who do, and I think just relax. It's going to be fine. It is what it is. Nobody's, when you use, again, a loaded term like genocide to describe what is just a demographic shift, I worry about somebody's sort of sanity almost, because it's a very dramatic term for something that is quite benign, actually. But whenever you bring up, birth rates and sync it up with migration, I think some people do start to get a little bit squeamish around that topic, right?
I think, look, I say this all the time. It's essentially a meme for the people who follow me. I'm mixed race, so I don't care. I mean, like, I'm proud of the Asian side of my family and the white side of my family. My dad, he came from nothing, and it is what it is. I honestly don't think it's that big a deal. I understand that people are scared about losing their culture because they believe, our culture is the best culture. And there's a lot of things in that were birthed from Western culture that I think are great too. But at the end of the day, it's tough, but it ultimately comes down to democracy. And there are problems with this, but look, if you've got people on the alt-right they're saying the great replacement, things like this, and they're upset, and they're upset, they're angry white people aren't reproducing, and they want a white ethnostate, whatever. Personally, I understand why they think that they're threatened, but I honestly don't care. That's but I guess my main point is they're scared. And so they're going to use terms like genocide. They're gonna start rallying around each other. But what happens? You have these white people who become white nationalists. Keep in mind, you have a lot of white people, like 100% white people, who also don't care about white nationalism, about white people or white culture. So this idea that somehow the great replacement is the problem, like that migrants are the problem, it's not true, right?
Of course not.
So, certainly these people could say, like, oh, if migrants come in, they're replacing us. Like, yeah, technically, but you need to realize if half of your own perceived group doesn't agree with you and is okay with it, the problem isn't the migrants. The problem is you aren't the majority of your own demographic, right? So I guess one way to put it is, if 65% of people in America keep voting one way, there you go, end of story. And you can get mad all day that you're in the minority and the way you want the world to be is disappearing, but in 100 years, everything will be changed. And society, culture, it changes all the time, and there are people that want to hold on to the way things used to be. There are pros and there are cons related to changes in culture and things like that. But I look, at ancient history and how the world used to be, and I look at today, and I'm like, man, things are dramatically different. So there's no telling what the world's going to be like in the future. I imagine the world, our country, I should say the United States and your country, they're going to get a lot worse, and then they'll get a lot better, and they'll get a lot worse, and it's all just opinions at the end of the day, So I certainly, to an extent, don't fault people who are white and, are concerned about the loss of their heritage and culture. I think when they start getting really extreme with it and start saying things like, start getting into race realism, and I'm like, nah, yeah, exactly. It's like, look, I've had conversations with some of these people where their arguments fall apart when it comes to mixed race people. Like someone actually told me that I can't get an organ transplant because I'm part Asian. I would have to find someone who is also part Asian, and I'm like, that's not true. It's not true. But it's a conundrum, I guess, for the more extreme people who are, neo-Nazi-ish, right? There are certainly people in the alt-right who are just about their identity, and they have a lot of the same arguments as any other identitarian group. And unfortunately, there's an overlap between them and the crazies, like the really fringy neo-Nazi kind of people, and that costs them credibility, right? If somebody goes on, when I see people on Twitter say "kill white people," I'm like, dude, that's not cool. I don't. You shouldn't say anything like that. Yeah. But you end up with people who are, people see that, they get frustrated by it, and it creates the alt-right, white nationalists, not necessarily the neo-Nazis, but there are going to be neo-Nazis who are, in between both groups, the neo-Nazis and the alt-right. And then when you see a guy in Charlottesville with a swastika flag, I'm sorry, when you see these groups that use Nazi imagery and things associated with the occult and Nazism, you're going to lose credibility. There's Baked Alaska, right? I'm sure you're familiar.
I'm glad you brought him up. I was going to do a little bit about him actually, but go for it. Yeah, awesome.
No, I mean, look, you talk to him in person. He's a nice guy. He posts before he was banned. He'd post things saying like no violence. We shouldn't hate people based on their race. But then he goes out in Charlottesville and he starts yelling, "Hail Victory" and things like that.
Yeah,
like that's literally the Nazi, the Nazi call.
Yeah, exactly right. So my take on Baked Alaska probably isn't very nuanced. I remember the guy when he was a wannabe, kind of journalist, and when he was at BuzzFeed and that shit. So I've kind of watched him change when he became a Trumper, and then started sort of virtue signaling to the alt-right because he can say, oh well, I'm part Jewish and all of this stuff. So for me, Baked Alaska is a real piece of shit. I don't know why so many people have been so keen to kind of, he's all right. They're happy to stand with him because he's personable or whatever. The things he does and says when he's on his stream, where he's literally just harassing, he'll turn on his stream after he said something racially charged to an Uber driver and then goes, oh, look, I'm white and I'm being kicked out of an Uber because I'm white. No, you're getting kicked out of the Uber because you've racially abused a black driver, dude. We all know what's happened. We all know what you're about. And then when you're fucking marching with actual Nazis to that, and then playing the victim because you get, fucking tear gassed or pepper sprayed, which fair enough, that sucks ass. You shouldn't do that to people. But the guy's a fucking asshole. I mean,
he's nice to you in person, right?
Sure, right.
And so this is why people are like, well, he's been nice to me. But the one thing that I kind of took offense to was that I did an interview with him in Berkeley. And in the interview, my interviews aren't super hardcore. I don't attack people or anything like that. I let him explain himself, talk about his views so we can kind of understand him from his point of view. And then I said, look, man, you made these jokes on Twitter with like 1488 and stuff. You got called out for that, and he apologized. And he was like, it was stupid. I shouldn't have done that. What does he do? Like a month later, he doubles down.
Cool.
He starts posting memes with like Laura Loomer in a gas chamber and other stuff. And yeah, to a lot of people, those things are really funny. But I saw him in LA because this dude got stabbed several times. And
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. When that dude got stabbed, I was in LA, and Baked was like, dude, this is crazy. And I was like, all right, like, let me see what's up. I'll come down and you tell me everything that happened. I don't remember if I did a report on it, but I might not have because of there was like privacy issues. Like a guy literally just got stabbed, so I needed to make sure things had cleared up. But I flat out said to him, I was like, dude, like, why are you posting this stuff, man? And then he just said he didn't care. He's like, I don't even care anymore. It's whatever. And I'm like, that's not cool. The reason I took offense to it is because he does an interview with me where I felt like he was lying. I felt like he was trying to manipulate my interview, my audience. And here I was trying to be like, all right, man, look, you've come off, you've told me things. You did, like in this interview, you said you were sorry about this stuff. And all right, great. I published that. And that video exists. And then what does he do like a month or two later? He doubles down on all of that stuff. And I'm like,
the thing with him is he doesn't believe any of the shit he says. All Baked Alaska cares about is just being in the spotlight. So, he right now it behooves him to sort of appeal to this new wave, alt-right, semi-neo-Nazi, diet Nazi audience, because they will be very engaged with what he's got to say. It will artificially prop him up. But they're in for a shock as well, because I don't think this former BuzzFeed journalist wannabe believes even any of that shit. He just says whatever he feels he has to say to get the reaction, get the attention. Intellectually, he's a fucking child. It's embarrassing.
I guess I try not to disparage people. I try to avoid getting into conflict with people. But I guess the last thing I'll say on the whole thing, he posted these memes. He got in trouble for it. He does an interview with me where he apologizes. He posts more memes, even more like hardcore, and now he's deplatformed entirely, right? So Twitter's removed him. And so there you go. If you want to virtue signal, if you want to be a part of a group that's, if you want to move further and further into the extreme, there comes a point where you fall off the cliff, and that's what Baked Alaska did to himself. He there was a time where he was like, he was new right for a little while, right? And then he just kept moving further and further into the more extreme racial politics to the point where he was posting really bad stuff, And so there you go. He's gone now. And that's what happens.
Yeah, and for me, I don't think he'll be missed. I was going to bring him up around the Kilroy thing, but we'll get to that.
There's the perfect segue, I guess.
Well, yeah, if you want to do the Kilroy stuff, I was just going to ask you sort of in a more general term, just about what you think of the alt-right, because for me, so I've gone through something I think that's you'll probably be able to identify with yourself. I used to work at a very leftist publication as a journalist. I used to be at the Daily Dot, which I'm sure you find as comical as I do for some of their representations of stories. It's very politically charged. And I took a job at Breitbart kind of as a reaction to stories they were suppressing, which was primarily the Tim Hunt story. When that recording came out that exonerated Tim Hunt, and it proved that the female feminist journalist that had broke the story about Tim Hunt had lied, the Daily Dot wouldn't let me publish that follow-up story because they were worried it would affect her job, and that was their rationale for it. So it was okay for a woman to ruin Tim Hunt, but it wasn't okay for us to publish the fact that the woman had lied and draw attention to it. And I was outraged by this, and that was the beginning of the end of I don't want to use the term red pill. I think that's ridiculous, but that was when I started waking up saying, well, actually, yeah, this leftist, a propaganda that people talk about, maybe there's something to this. And I happen to know Milo. And Milo was opening a tech section at Breitbart. He said, come over. We're insulated from the general politics associated with Breitbart. And I had a problem with Breitbart because I talked about Andrew Breitbart, the history of the Acorn scandal, James O'Keefe swaggering around dressed up as a pimp to prove that they'll give money to prostitutes or whatever. And it was all embarrassing. And I didn't want my brand to be associated with that or my work to be associated with that. But ultimately, nobody else was going to touch the Tim Hunt story, these alternative stories. So I went and I jumped across. The problem I then had was I was suddenly getting called alt-right. And that didn't reflect my politics whatsoever. And it got worse because in the last election, the American election, obviously it was going to have an impact on me. I live in America. I absolutely resoundingly did not want Hillary Clinton to get in. And I celebrated when Trump did, which,
well, there you go.
I don't know.
Nazi.
Yeah, right. That was it. That was all it took. So all of a sudden, I was getting called alt-right, and every time I said I am not alt-right, I definitely am not. They would, it doesn't matter. They were saying, well, you worked at Breitbart, so you are. You supported Trump, so you are. So my question to you is, first of all, what do you make of the alt-right as the new big bad? Because I do find a lot of these alt-right characters say things I find absolutely abhorrent and reprehensible. But also, by being in such a close proximity to them, are you ever worried that this affects sort of your brand and getting your message out there?
I mean, I guess that's the big misconception. I'm not in proximity to them, right? I actually am more in proximity to feminists and the left than I am to the right. So, I mean, look, I've said this several times. I slept at Occupy Wall Street for a couple months for the duration of the camp. Literally, I'm sleeping in there. I'm drinking their water. I'm eating their food. I'm hanging out with these people. I still hang out with some of these people today. The only people I ever really hang out in New York, they're like progressive feminists. I've known Lacey Green for long before the whole red pill thing happened, and we'd hang out. And people are always like, how do you hang out with these feminists? Like, dude, I grew up as an anarchist. I'm from the South Side of Chicago. I live in New York City. I don't hang out with people on the right. But I'll tell you what, there's a thing happening in our culture where you have these individuals that are misrepresented in the media, and it makes me curious, right? When they call Paul Joseph Watson a Nazi, and I'm like, but he says he's anti-alt-right. Well, something's going on here, right? So I think I've done a handful of interviews and I've covered the general conflict of the U.S. But what happens is there's like a photo of me, right, at dinner with like James Alsop, Baked Alaska, Brittany Pettibone, and a few people. There's also a photo of me teaching refugee children how to fly drones. But the only thing the left will share so actually they share this photo of me and they're like, look, Tim's a Nazi. And then when I laugh and I'm like, oh, I must also be a refugee child because here's a picture of me with refugee children. They say, you think hanging out with brown children absolves you? It's like, okay,
Can never win.
If the multiple photos I have that, like, you know, if you look at my Instagram, it's all me hanging out with like workers' rights protests. You know, I did a documentary about 2 refugee brothers. No one ever says, Tim, are you worried about your proximity to, you know, refugees, and like eating dinner with these people is going to compromise your image? Like, no one ever asked me that. And the reality is, if you look at my body of work, like on my YouTube, the documentaries that I've done on Vice and on my YouTube are all pretty lefty, right? They're not hardcore SJW. They're just like left-leaning, you know, commentary. Like when I did the documentary on these 2 refugee brothers, it was sympathetic to them. Like, this is a guy who almost died trying to escape war. And the story we were telling was about one brother had made it successfully to Europe, and the other brother was stuck in Turkey on the verge of being kicked back to Syria, which would probably lead to his death. They'd force him to fight in the war, and he likely wouldn't survive. And so, you know, there we have it. We're not dealing with the bigger picture of what's happening. We're just looking at this family, and it was a sad story. And it made you sympathetic to these 2 brothers, English speaking, educated, Family Guy loving. You know, the one brother, they play Destiny, you know, the first person shooter, and they were really relatable. And I guess for me, like the point of that story was, it was kind of like, look, man, you know, you constantly hear about these really bad actors and this terrorism and stuff, but I want to do something on the ground with some regular dudes, you know, and try and get people to understand that there are educated, intelligent people that you would actually love to hang out with, who would absolutely grab a beer with you because they're atheists. You know, they're just like regular people that you'd love. I don't know, like, nobody cares that I did those things. Nobody cares I made an hour-long documentary about institutional racism in Ferguson because it doesn't suit their politics. What happens when I go and, you know, I'll stop right here. I'll say this. Like, how I feel about the alt-right is that they've got bad leadership and it makes them really bad, and there's too much overlap with actual extremists. So that the taint of the extremists seeps in to what the idea of the alt-right was, I guess. The idea of white nationalism doesn't make sense to me in America because America was never I mean, you can call it a white country, I guess, but it's only because we colonized it. Technically, if you want to talk about, you know, migrants coming and displacing the Native Americans, there's always been a variety of people who lived here, from the Chinese migrants who came here. We had multiple European settlers come here. We have, you know, Mexico is mestizos, right? The people of Mexico are mixed race, Native American, European. So I don't know. There's no argument to me for like a white ethno-state in the United States. That literally makes no sense. And even to that extent, I think, you know, when it comes to Europe and these areas where they claim we're like historically white, I'm still just like, look, man, the future is just going to be mixed race. Like, I firmly believe, you know, South Park did an episode about this where the Goobacks, like, they're all bald brown people. And yeah, I think, you know, as our cultures continue to mix and our communications technology gets better, I just think this whole argument's kind of a waste of time. But when it comes to white rights people, I understand why someone might be offended if they go on Twitter and they see tons of posts saying kill white people, you know, fuck white people, and just these disparaging comments based on the color of someone's skin. Yeah. I grew up on the south side of Chicago where it was like a mixed area. And I've seen white dudes get abused by the cops, and there were I mean, I had cops kick my door in at gunpoint when I was something like, I don't know, 20 years old, and just totally violate me and my buddy's rights. And, you know, my buddy's a white dude, and I'm from an area where, yeah, like, I've seen this thing. I've seen people who are white without privilege, and there's like this argument that no, they're still privileged to an extent. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, look, man, you're never going to convince a dude who grew up in the gutter on drugs with an abusive dad who was beaten by cops every other day that he had privilege. It's not going to happen. So when you have these people who are like, I'm sick and tired of people attacking me, you know, based on the color of my skin, I understand that. And the only way you're gonna solve that is if the people who, like, you know, Twitter needs to come down and say, look, man, Twitter essentially allows people to post these things. It's mind blowing. You know, you can't have that. So I forgot what we're talking about, like the
proximity.
The white ethno-state.
Yeah.
So, you know, when talking about the alt-right, yeah, I guess anyway, back to the proximity point, because I kind of lost my train of thought.
Hey, it's all right, brother.
It's the left doesn't like that I'm willing to empathize with someone who feels attacked, right? To better understand the perspective of someone like Brittany Pettibone, who is a civic nationalist, not a white nationalist, who has repeatedly said, look, she's friends with people who are white nationalists, but she disagrees with them, and that's okay. And I'm like, sure, people have different politics all the time. They get mad that I do an interview with her. So what do they say? Well, Tim's a Nazi. Because that's the only way to refute the facts that I will present. Mm-hmm. If I do a documentary about institutional racism in Ferguson, they say, yeah, who cares? We know that. That doesn't help us in any way. When I do an interview with Brittany Pettibone or, Kyle Chapman, and they say things that humanize them, well, now the only way to refute what I've said is to call me a Nazi and say I'm a liar.
Yeah, the left wants you to not give a platform to anybody they disagree with. And if you give them the platform, even though you as the journalist are neutral, you're simply asking the questions, they'll say, well, no. The only appropriate response to the existence of these people is to not give them a platform, to make them look human, to get their viewpoints out there. And I find that a very troubling trend, honestly.
Well, what happens when you learn that someone like Baked Alaska is depressed because people just keep attacking him for being white? Well, the average person goes like, yeah, man, that's not cool. You shouldn't attack somebody based on the color of their skin. And that creates sympathy. And the left doesn't want that. They want to make sure that everyone hates people like Baked Alaska. And there's certainly reasons to hate Baked Alaska, but the color of his skin is not one of them.
Certainly, yeah.
So what do? They can't argue against the information. They have to argue against the person. They turn factual arguments into moral arguments, right? Guilty by association. And that's, it's the problem for me is, I consider myself, I grew up in the hacker community. I consider myself like a scientist. I wouldn't hold myself to the same level as actual academic scientists, but what I do isn't supposed to be political. I'm doing things for the most part to try and understand things and just tell people what I've learned. That's about it. And what happens when what you've learned contradicts one political faction? They attack you for it. So right now, God, it's so annoying when people are like, you're hanging out with the alt-right. Like, I literally don't know anybody in the alt-right. I've been in the presence of Baked Alaska like 4 times, and that's because he's been at the same events as me because I cover these events. I think I interviewed Mike Cernovich, who denounced the alt-right. I think I interviewed him like two times, maybe 3 times, I think twice. And somehow they're like, that's proof that Tim is friends with these people. It's like, I'm actually not. Like, I've actually gotten to like hot debates with these people. In fact, that photo of me at dinner with them was me basically telling them they were going to lose the culture war. I was like, look, man, I was like, the left has won. They dominate media. I was like, you guys are not relevant. And they argued and said, that's not true. We are going to win. You'll see. And I'm like, I'm mixed, man. You guys are white, and you're worried about what's going on. And I explained to them, listen, man, if you're worried about white people being replaced or whatever, well, your problem isn't the people replacing you. Your problem is the white people who disagree with you, right? If your own group doesn't agree with you, you don't have an argument,
Yeah.
So I can understand why they're scared, why they're concerned, and they want to fight back. And by all means, I get it, but it's not a unified faction. Like, white people aren't a unified faction. In which case, what happens? Hey, people like my dad marry a Korean woman, and then I'm born, and then I'm like literally the antithesis of your argument. So,
the thing is as well, I don't think the alt-right was ever meant to be these people, right? So I get into arguments all the time about the alt-right and where it came from and what it was supposed to be. And a few things happened. And again, this is sort of like leftist mainstream media taking over words, subverting them, and then making them into something that they aren't. And then, bad people sort of embracing that while all the sensible people leave it behind. So obviously the term alt-right comes from Paul Gottfried, who himself is Jewish. It was then co-opted by Richard Spencer. As a result of that, when Steve Bannon said, hey, Breitbart's a platform for the alt-right, and the alt-right are interested in Trumpian politics and this sort of thing, the mainstream media saw that window of opportunity because on the one hand, you've got, kind of the pinup for the white nationalist movement, Richard Spencer, supposedly urbane, intellectual, presentable on camera, another asshole that I got no time for, incidentally. You got Steve Bannon saying the term that Richard Spencer has popularized, but didn't coin. That's an important distinction. It was coined by a Jewish professor. And they said, hey, what if we just said the alt-right were all white nationalists like this guy over here? And bada bing, bada boom. And now they are. And for me, I've talked about this multiple times in my podcast about how the alt-right was meant to be a description for new wave conservatives, and then it became something else. anybody who's still holding on to that term, I question either their intellect or their faith when it comes to their political movement, because I think they are bad actors now, the self-described alt-right. I think they are everything that the mainstream media said they were when they weren't that. I think that's all that's left behind.
You know what I found I rarely go out and hang out with people. I really just work all day and travel, and I'm hanging out, I'm meeting and interviewing random people all the time. When I do actually meet people, they're like far lefty, anarcho-feminist kind of people. And what I've found is that my friends, my regular friends, like when I go to LA, I hang out with my friend, she's an actress. They don't read the news. They don't search for the news. They don't investigate the news. They just share word of mouth.
Yeah.
And so the right is different. And there's this phenomenon that I've noticed, and this is just my opinion, it's anecdotal. The left, as I've perceived it, tends to just accept the mainstream narrative as it's shared, right? So someone will be like, did you hear X happen? And they'll say, that's true. The right will Google search these things. And so you end up with two extremes. Mm-hmm. The people on the left will start repeating fake news. Like, recently Sally Cohn, she tweeted, dictators ban words. Got like 40,000 retweets. Nobody banned any words. The CDC, the issue there was that the CDC wanted to make sure that their budget proposals could play well with Republican politicians. Mm-hmm. That was it. So they said, in a meeting among the CDC, people at the CDC said, let's make sure we don't use these words, because if we pitch this to Republicans, they might turn it down. Mm-hmm. And so everyone was like, okay. And then what did the Washington Post say? Trump administration bans words. Yeah. That's fake news. That's actually completely fake news. But my friends on the left believe it because they don't see the correction. They just share. Here's what happened. Did you hear Trump banned words? Oh, my God. So that's the extreme on the left. The extreme on the right is the conspiracy theories, right? When
Pizzagate. Fuck me.
Yeah, right, exactly. When you start digging too deep and you start reading this crazy stuff and you really disbelieve the mainstream, you start believing Pizzagate is real. And I can say definitively that so one of the issues I took with Pizzagate is that they were sharing this 4chan post that claimed certain words meant certain things, and I can tell you definitively they are made up. Absolutely made up. Are there aspects of the Pizzagate story that were suspicious? Yeah, of course. I mean, these emails had weird language in them that clearly...
The emails are definitely coded. I think we can say that. But, you're right. I saw that 4chan post, and it says, this is leaked from internally in the FBI, that pizza means boy and pasta means girl or whatever the fuck it was. It's like, that is fake. That's complete nonsense. Yeah.
You know what I think it was? I think it was drugs. Right? There was one email that said, would I have more fun playing dominoes on pizza than I would on pasta? And somebody started going crazy, like, they're talking about boys and girls, and dominoes is code for like sex. And I'm like, how does that make sense? Would I have more fun playing sex? Like that's not English. Replace dominoes or leave dominoes, call it Monopoly, whatever, but replace pizza with Coke and pasta with crack. And they're saying, hey, would I have more fun dancing on crack or cocaine? What do you think? Like that sentence makes sense. And you know what? We know people have code words for drugs. Yeah. I think those emails were, look, if you were to tell me politicians do drugs all the time and are emailing each other about buying drugs, I'd be like, yeah, and like, that's not a conspiracy. That's like probable,
Check out Rob.
They're all coked out of their minds. All the executives are. Everybody, no, I don't want to disparage any particular companies, but there are certain companies in media that everybody's just doing coke and ecstasy. So that's not surprising. But yeah, anyway, back to the point. When people on the right get so distrustful, they start digging in and looking for, the truth. Well, they find the extreme. And so you've got in the moderate areas, the left will believe to an extent the mainstream narrative, and the right will be more likely to search for and fact check the mainstream narrative. And the extreme ends on the far left, they'll parrot psychotic things like, Louise Mensch and the Russiagate stuff.
Oh, she's lost it, mate. We do regular bits about her on the show.
There you go.
And I met her during the Tim Hunt thing. Tim Hunt had mentored her. And I say met her online. We interacted. And she was like very grateful that I was covering the story in a truthful way. This is very early on in my Breitbart career. She knows Milo. They've been pictured together. And I was like, you know what? Maybe this Louise Mensch isn't all that bad, And then Trump, Russia. I mean, I think she was. she's in the grips of some serious mental illness, in my opinion. Yeah. I'm not fit to diagnose it, but that's how it comes across.
So I guess in both aspects, you end up with the horseshoe. Both the extreme left and right believe crazy conspiracy theories, you know, and they're relatively close to each other, I guess, you know. When I heard they're now accusing Jill Stein, I was like, oh, God.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. You jumped the shark. You're going to convince me that Jill Stein, you know, lefty, pro-Palestinian feminist her whole life, has just arbitrarily decided to support Israel-loving Trump. Grab him by the pussy, Israel-loving Trump. Yeah, no. I'm sorry. Like, Jill Stein is a sleeper agent for Putin and was working to prop up Trump's campaign. It's just too crazy for me. Yeah, I mean, sure, there's like a lottery tickets chance it might be true, but I would never bet money on that. Sorry.
Yeah, no chance. So look, I'll get on to this Kilroy stuff. This is the topical stuff that's going on in the world of Tim Pool right now. So first of all, let me just say, you know, I want to sort of congratulate you, I guess, for being one of the first people to speak up about what was going on over there. I thought your video definitely made it incredibly clear that there's something untoward going on with these NDAs and non-competes, which for me, you know, I've done speaking engagements myself, never signed anything like that ever. So clearly there was something wrong here. And you were the first to sort of break away. You did a video on it, and you even said, you know, I don't like to create drama, but this needs to be talked about. And you probably risked a little bit of ire from this group of people that, I'm sure they were. I'm sure they're very upset.
These people who are speaking at Kilroy have no experience in this area, and for some reason are trying to lecture me on what the contract means and what the intention of the event was. I've never understood this desire from human beings to try and be an expert in an area where they're not an expert and actually argue with someone who clearly has more experience than them. Okay. These are people who are, you know, this, and I don't mean everybody speaking at Kilroy, but there were people speaking at Kilroy, you know, and they've got like 1,000 YouTube subscribers, like smaller channels, saying I'm wrong. And I'm like, listen, I've gone through like 2 or 3 speaking agents already. I literally just got paid to speak at an event. I've just finished negotiations for another speaking event in a foreign country. I do this all the time. Most people don't realize when I do international trips that like a decent amount, maybe like 10 or 20%, it's like a speaking gig in this area. And so I find stories around it, you know, so I'm going to be going back to Scandinavia in a few months, and I'm going to start looking, you know, there's some stories I don't want to give it away just yet, but there's a speaking gig there. A lot of these times they're not paid, and I never sign anything. The only time I've ever, I believe 2 instances where I signed something, and it was because they wanted to share a digital file. And the first one was international broadcast television, and the one I just did the other day was for a live stream. And these contracts specifically state, they say something like, this contract defines the video being produced at this event as the product. You know, and it says name agrees that that he has the rights to allow product to be shot and distributed, you know, worldwide for whatever amount of time. And that specifically relates to that one speech. Yeah. So I'm not surprised there were people who signed the NDA and the NCA because they don't have any experience. You know, to sign away, here's what people don't understand, right? They would say something like, or I guess let me start from the beginning. It was a 3-year non-disclosure agreement that had to do with operations, guests, and finance. And it was a 16-month non-compete agreement with a geographical covenant, a covenant relating to a geographical area of 100 miles around Phoenix. That does not mean it only impacts Phoenix. It means it particularly impacts Phoenix. Part of the contract, the way it was worded, means, let's say you and I went to the event, and you paid for a ticket. That makes you a customer. Well, the contract said I would not solicit any customer for competing business. Well, Kilroy is in the business of producing discussions around free speech. Is my YouTube channel competing with their event? Exactly. I believe it is easily interpretable to any judge. Absolutely. In which case, I cannot ask my own fans at the event to do an interview or even take a selfie. I understand it's extreme. You know, I really don't think Kilroy was going to, you know, file suit against somebody for taking a selfie with somebody else. No, they want the promotion. But you shouldn't sign away your rights to something like that. That's just, I'm sorry. The non-compete they told me they would get rid of, or they would negotiate. But they said that the non-disclosure agreement was non-negotiable.
And they cited safety reasons. And I've done a lot of stories in the past where I've talked about the sinister implications of the NDA and how the NDA pretty much exists to, I don't know, let's say you wanted to be critical of the event after the fact or talk about something that happened there. You wouldn't be able to. But what we found here, specifically with this Kilroy thing, the only reason that NDA is there is that some people are getting paid to talk and other people aren't getting paid to talk. And they don't want that out there because it'll damage the brand and the ideals on which this Kilroy event was founded. So it all comes back to money as per fucking usual.
Well, and that's what I brought up. They kept citing safety. And it's really annoying to have these, these people who are inexperienced, who are just YouTubers. Like, look, man, I was the founding member of Vice News, right? I was working for Fusion. I've signed with talent agencies numerous contracts. I'm not somebody who started a YouTube channel, and I don't mean this disrespectfully. There's a lot of people who have fallen into this field accidentally and haven't worked in the industry and dealt with contracts and dealt with agencies. And there's a lot more than just what we've covered so far as to why you don't sign an agreement like this. But when I saw this and it said operations, guests, and finances, I said, okay, yeah, I'm not playing this game. First of all, speakers don't sign these agreements, especially if recompense has not been agreed upon beforehand. When I get an offer, right? So I get an offer to speak somewhere. The first thing I say is, what is your budget for an honorarium? That means, how much can you pay me as a speaker? If it's a panel discussion, they don't pay. And I was asked to be on a panel at Kilroy. They don't pay. They almost never pay. And so I said, okay, it's not a paid gig. But I saw Kilroy, where they were fundraising as a low-budget community event. And then when I saw this NDA, I realized this is a for-profit business venture that, for one thing, is fundraising, which sure, fine, if people want to give money to a business for free, I get it, but you really should get something in return if you're going to make a donation. It's a business, right? It's not a nonprofit. So I said, okay, this is a business. This is not a communal event. This is not a charity. This is a for-profit venture that wants to restrict my speech and have you sign a non-compete. I'm not going to do that. And and as you mentioned, it turns out, I guess, what people believe now is that some people are getting paid and some people aren't. And that presents a problem because I think Andy Worski talked about this. Honestly, as I mentioned, I avoid drama, and typically my videos are about news issues. I don't go and watch other people's YouTube channels about drama. But I was talking to a friend of mine who has been dealing with this stuff, talking to the Kilroy people, and it was something like he was mad that he promoted the event and he's not getting paid. Like, I don't want to say that's just Worski, but apparently there's an issue with, like, hey man, you're going to pay some people, but you're not going to pay the people promoting your event. And so there's like some issue there. Here's something really important about the contract people need to understand. All of these people saying it's a basic contract, it's totally fine, you're 100% wrong. I signed an agreement to allow my video that I did a speech, and they want to share that video worldwide, okay? Mm-hmm. As part of that agreement, it says that I acknowledge, I agree. Mm-hmm. I have no idea what's going on outside. I acknowledge that I have no agreements with any other companies that would restrict the distribution of my speech at this event. Mm-hmm. That means if there is a non-compete with Kilroy in Phoenix, within the 100-mile radius of Phoenix, I would have to tell the other company I'm speaking at, you can't broadcast this in Phoenix because it's a speaking event that competes with another speaking event. And they would say, what? Like, that's not a thing. Like, what? Why? Why would you have a non-compete for speaking engagements? That makes no sense. Basically, or I should also add, I have other agreements, right? So I have television contracts for TV show pitches that haven't been sold. They might get sold. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But in those, they say, you don't have any outstanding agreements with other companies restricting the distribution of content. They are not asking for exclusivity. They're making sure I don't already have it. And if I have a non-compete in Phoenix, that would bar me from entering standard agreements with other companies for basic things like TV shows or live streams even. Mm-hmm. So no, don't sign a non-compete. And the NDA for 3 years is just it's just ridiculous. I'm sorry.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
And look, let's be clear about why this legislation, not legislation, that's the wrong word, but why this litigation, this these contracts are here, right? Kilroy wants to corner a market, and it's very clear to me there's a business focus here. They want to become this, the new free speech speaking place that you go to. And they're not thinking about event 1, they're thinking about where we're going to be.
Event 2.
Event 5. Right away. There's a future plan, but this isn't going to fly. They raised funds from the public to fund this event, and yet they want to have their cake and eat it, and not be transparent about it. We need to know if you've given any money to Kilroy. I'd certainly want to know where that money's going and what it's being spent on. Yeah, who's getting paid, who isn't, who's deemed to be worth it, who isn't, who's promoting the event. And quite clearly what they've tried to do is create a sort of new alternative to a lot of these panels and expos that you have out there. And they were looking at this as a business opportunity, which is completely contrary to what they said it was about. So that's why it's there. It's very obvious. And I think what's become increasingly troubling is that some of the people, the bigger names, and indeed some of the people who organized it, the founders like Dave Cullen, have dropped out now. Yeah. I mean, if that doesn't tell you this is a fucking dumpster fire, I don't know what does.
I've been relatively respectful, I think. I did a video with Sargon, and I'm like, look, Dave announced they're dropping the contracts, the NDA and the NCA. But there's something interesting in Dave's statement. He said that he had a different vision for what the event should have been.
Exactly.
And it couldn't be reconciled. I was on a phone call with Dave, Sargon, and I believe it was Sister Danger. I don't want to, I don't know if it was for sure her, but it was Base Mama and somebody else, another woman. And they flat out said, I'm paraphrasing, right, because I didn't record the call or anything, but they said something like, look, these contracts are just to prevent our employees, our volunteers from, say, like going into a room and taking pictures and then trying to sell those pictures to another company or something like that. And I said, then why did you send one to me? And the response was, because you are considered our employees. And then Sargon responded, I see. Oh, okay, I'm not interested in that. And then they backpedaled and said, oh, no. You're not actually like our employees, like contractors. And then Sargon again was like, yeah, I don't want to be your contractor either. So I don't want to speak too much about, what Sargon or Dave said at that point, but they said the agreement was to prevent the people they considered their employees, us, from taking content from the event and selling it somewhere else. And people need to realize, I think people are, a lot of these people who are big YouTubers haven't dealt with business before. Your YouTube channel, your business could be considered a third party. Yeah. If you have, it entirely depends. Do you have a second channel, right? How does your business operate? Do you have an LLC? How do you file your taxes? There's a lot to consider here. I understand that, again, I don't think Kilroy was going to go out and just start suing everybody. That'd be bad for them. But they said they wanted to, one of the things they said in the call was that they want to be able to review content going out and have ownership to an extent or something like that. And Sargon asked, wouldn't you have the copyright on the content you produce anyway under US law? Like when you produce something, you own it. And they said, no, not if someone else shoots it. And so I was like, there it is. They want the rights to the content being distributed from the event, no matter who makes it. I'm not going to agree to that. I'm sorry. So.
And I don't blame you. But on top of that as well, there's been like sort of some weird contradictory stuff going on. For example, this is where Baked Alaska was going to get brought up, but he came up organically. He was told, there's a scheduling conflict actually, so we can't accommodate you anymore. I think that's horseshit. I think basically what they've realized is that having Baked Alaska at your event is only going to make an event that's already tenuous and got problems just even worse. That's what he brings to the table. He's a drama queen, bad press, exactly.
Because look, one of the other issues with Kilroy that someone brought up to me, and again, like, let me just preface, I made one video and then everyone asked me to clarify, so I did a live stream about it, and then I tried to avoid, like, I just moved on. I'm like, I'm going to move on. But if they're going to remove Baked Alaska, who, look, he had close to 200,000 Twitter followers before he got suspended. They've got people speaking there who have, 100 followers. I mean, if you're pressed for time, I think there's other people you'd get rid of before Baked Alaska. It's clear to me that removing Baked Alaska was more about a PR, and I should say, in my opinion, it was about a PR issue. But yeah,
I don't know who some of these people are. I just see a bunch of cringeworthy names. Like everyone's trying to be way too edgy here. You got people called Nuance, bro, and shit like that. Like, come on, dude. Like, be serious. I never got that shit anyway. Ridiculous.
There's a lot of smaller channels that were really defending the event and telling me the contract was wrong and I was wrong. And I got to tell you, man, it's the most frustrating thing in the world when I literally have gone through multiple speaking agents, have contracts, regularly like getting offers and speaking at events, and then having somebody who's never spoken at an event before tell me they know more than me. I'm like, ugh.
Yeah, it's fucked up.
Like,
man.
you're supposed to be the rational community, right? You're supposed to understand when someone has more experience than you can trust them. They don't have to trust me. I get it. It's so frustrating to be like, dude, listen, I'm literally scheduled to speak this week at an event. Like, I am telling you I do this all the time. Why won't you listen?
Yeah, well, you know why they won't listen, right? Because in their mind, they're playing out this fantasy of having like the whole fucking great speech while they're on stage with Sargon of Akkad or something, and it's going to blow their YouTube channel up, right? That's all they give a fuck about.
I found it particularly interesting that a lot of the people who were questioning what was going on were bigger YouTube channels, and a lot of the people who were just defending the contracts and signing them were the smaller YouTube channels. And I think that can, there's something to be said about the experience of the individual. Somebody with hundreds of thousands of subs has probably dealt with contract offers before, or is more likely to have. And somebody with 5,000 or 6,000 subscribers probably hasn't had any offers and doesn't know how to deal with a contract. So it's not surprising. I just, one thing that really that bugs me, no matter what, is groupthink. This, just defending your tribe at all costs. I don't care for that. I don't play that. And and we can loop back to the conversation about the alt-right. I always tell people, never align yourself with a group ever. Don't do it, because you might today be like, hey man, the pinball wizards are a really fun group of people, and then 10 years from now they're literal Nazis, and then you got a pinball wizards tattoo on your arm. Or a better example is, I think it was Cernovich who said when alt-right was being used, he thought it meant a counter to the mainstream conservative, but conservative. Yep. And now it means white nationalist. And I'm like, well, you decided to align with the group, and the media, they branded you. So that's why I'll disavow all factions, all groups. Look, you do your thing, I'll do mine. I don't want to be associated with anybody or have anything to do with anybody. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, it comes and goes in waves. I'm at Occupy Wall Street. Everyone calls me a lefty. I had Jay Rosen said I'm obviously an activist. Even though the occupiers physically attacked me several times, the media called me a pro-Occupy activist. And now I have the media. There was Al Jazeera called me a white supremacist. Had to delete the video and apologize to me.
That was. I saw that, dude. I was going to bring that up at the end. That was a fucking disgrace, dude.
Yeah,
I would have lighted up immediately.
Because the post I was making was technically in defense of Muslims as much as it was in defense of white people. I said, I was like, is this the one time we're going to lump all, members of a group into one group based on the actions of an individual? Basically, Lorde said something, the singer said something like, all white people are responsible, something to that effect. Yeah. And that's when I was like, look, a crazy guy crashed into people, blame him. A terrorist committed an act of violence, blame the terror. I'm more of an individualist in a lot of areas, and so I'm always like, blame the individual. Certainly there are people who incite, and incitement is a crime too. But you can't have someone go on Twitter and blame entire groups of people based on the actions of individuals, right? I'm not trying to act like I don't understand patterns and cultures and things like that. Just in this instance, I was saying, basically, chill out. Al Jazeera takes that tweet and somehow tried to make it out like I was defending this guy. Like, what? Like, what? Are you crazy? Well, they deleted it, and I got a personal apology from some of the people there. Like, we're so sorry this happened. We've removed it from everywhere. That should never happen. These videos are terrible. I had this one outlet up in Portland call me alt-right, and they also apologized to me profusely and changed the article and were like, that never should have happened. We're so sorry. I'm so sorry this happened. It's like, it'll never happen again. And it's just absolutely ridiculous, man. Yeah. People don't want to face the facts. They don't want to face the truth. So they have to align people with tribes. And I've been adamant about being like, it's not even about me trying to avoid people. I literally don't hang out with anybody. I go skateboarding by myself. My brother just moved in with me, but I lived alone forever. And like probably the only person I hang out with is my brother, and we don't even actually hang out that often because I'm working all the time. If I go eat, I'll be like, hey, you want to go to the and that's it. In the past month or two, my brother's been hanging out with me. Maybe once or twice a month, I might go hang out with some of my, anarcho lefty friends, and that's about it. And it's funny because one of my friends she's like a feminist, tattoo, wears all black, like almost Antifa. Like I think someone in her, like I don't want to say too much, but she's got a family member who's hardcore Antifa who hates that she's friends with me. And we got into a fight once, and she was saying things like, "Why are you posting these things on Twitter? Like, oh, I don't know who you are." And then I'm like, dude, calm down. Let's get coffee. And then we got coffee, and I was just like, basically there was a post that was hyper-partisan fake news that accused some Trump supporters of like burning down a church, and then it turned out the church was actually vandalized by you probably heard the story. And I was like, look, when you take these stories from these hyper-partisan websites, they're fake news, they're lying to you. And I was like, here's the actual story. It was actually one of the guys from the church who did it, trying to frame the other side. So you have to be careful because there are hate crimes. And when you jump the gun, it makes you look wrong. And that toned her down. And she was like, oh, damn, I just attacked you for no reason. And I'm like, you were right. I'm like, yeah. So now we're like, that's like to the extent of the arguments. And I like to think that some of these people who are on the far left, they still believe in like their politics and social justice and Bernie Sanders, but they've stepped away from the cliff of, Antifa bike lock bashing people. Needless to say,
thank the Lord, it took long enough.
No, but these are only my friends, and it's because they're exposed to me, right?
Oh, right. I thought you were talking about the sort of mainstream in general, finally denouncing Antifa.
No, not at all. I mean, because they're friends with me and they trust me and I've known them for a long time, they're willing to listen. But even then, it's difficult. And like, I talked to a guy who he's wearing a sickle and hammer mask in Berkeley, giving out communist books, preaching communism. And so I said, all right, let's, I'll ask this guy some questions. And I said, basically we talked, I said, how do you, what are you doing here? He's like, communism is better than capitalism. Capitalism sucks. And then I asked him about Antifa. And I said, Antifa has attacked innocent people. And how do you feel about that? And he goes, that's screwed up. I don't like that. And I was like, oh, really? I was like, most people refuse to denounce Antifa. Yeah. Simply because they're like, it's not a group. It's not their, they're Nazis. But this guy was straight up like, nah, that's not cool. And so I asked him, so wait, let me ask you. If Antifa, in their attempts to fight fascism, beat up somebody who was innocent, is that okay? And he was like, no, it's not okay, man. It's oppression. And I was like, I shook his hand. I'm like, I don't care if you're a communist. You're allowed to believe whatever you want. We can't be authoritarians. We can't be pro collateral damage. We need to be like, look, if you go out to fight for some cause and you beat an old woman in the street, you lose. That's not okay. But sure enough, when I was in San Jose for this Trump rally, there were a bunch of protesters. Many of them were Bernie Sanders supporters. Bernie had to come out and say, stop doing this. But they were beating old people. I kid you not. I watched an old couple, looked like they were in their 60s, get shoved to the ground. Their hats were ripped off and set on fire. And this is where the famous video of the guy in the yellow polo getting smacked in the back of the head comes from. I was there. I filmed that. Someone runs up and he's just walking down the street, minding his own business, and they whack him in the head with a bag. And I'm like, that's authoritarianism, man. That's subjecting people to your politics based on threat of physical violence. And that's not cool. But it was cool to meet a communist who agreed. And I'm like, I think the sickle and hammer and your ideology of
that's the whole point. They're
poorly.
Definitely out there. Yeah, they're definitely out there. It's just you gotta you gotta realize. I mean, this is what makes me laugh. I mean, horseshoe theory's never been truer than in 2017. All these right wing motherfuckers saying, they're all up in arms. Oh my God, look at Antifa. This is what the left wants. This is what the left is all about. Right. And it's like, hang on a minute. The left is saying the same shit about your extremists. Yeah, exactly. And can't you see the fucking parallels? Like, please, guys. And you got snowflakes on the right now. Like, I mean, I brought this up on a podcast I did the other day. Like Mike Cernovich tweeting about people's past tweets. The fucking irony of this is ridiculous. This is a guy who wants don't bring up that thing I wrote when I was a pickup artist, like he's, and I've met Mike and talked to Mike at speaking engagements. I like Mike, by the way. He's been super nice to me in person, but it's like, you did write a blog about how you whipped your dick out in front of a woman and said, are you going to leave me with this hard on? And then you don't like it when that gets brought up and damages your credibility, but you're fighting for this shit. Like, guys, there's hypocrites all over the place.
Yeah, but I when it comes to Cernovich, he knows what he's doing.
I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely.
When I interviewed him in Berkeley, in the interview, I'm planning on walking up to the point where I'm flat out going to ask him, you're just here for PR to get attention. And I'm like, because I don't, but he says it himself. Yeah. And so he says, yeah, he flat out said that he was there so that Antifa would look crazy and it would make them look good and they get a bunch of attention in the press. And then I'm like, okay, I have no idea what to ask now, because I was actually going to try and walk him to that point and get him to say, are you just here? He just comes out and says it. And that's why people like him, because he flat out says he's playing the game. Yeah. He just said, he admits it.
Yeah. So look, I'll get on to the end, because I know we've run over you, and I don't want to monopolize your time because I know how busy you are. So look, this is what I wanted to wrap up with, and it's such a big topic, and shame we couldn't fit more in, because the time's flown by, dude. I could talk to you all day. Oh yeah. So here's the thing: media, fake news, journalism, and the sort of death of journalism as an objective craft. Now, that's what I studied. That's what I always wanted to be. I grew up with that idea. I used to watch all the movies as a kid, not the detective movies or the action movies. It was always stuff like All the President's Men, the journalist that was desperately trying to get the truth out. That's what molded me and made me want to be who I am. And, I started my first reporting gig 17, 18 years ago, and I've been in and out in journalism, had some obscure beats, been a music journalist. I write primarily about esports, competitive gaming now. But I don't introduce myself as a journalist anymore like I used to. I used to wear that like a badge of pride. I used to say it to people, yeah, I'm a journalist. It used to give me a little bit of fucking credibility. In the UK, for example, you can sign people's passport photographs. It's teacher, doctor, journalist. You can verify who somebody is for a government passport, right? It used to be a respected profession. Now, not so much. And I almost hate the term, and I look at what journalism has become, and it is just depressing to me that you've got activists posing as journalists, people who, legendary journalists of 40 years experience, who are even saying publicly, no, we got to get rid of objectivity. It's not going to work. The evil side, the Nazi side is fighting dirty. We got to fight dirty too. I mean, that mindset is what made the DNC turn into what it is today after, they saw the Bush administration play dirty and whatever. That's a separate topic. But the bottom line is, guys like yourself are this alternative to the mainstream media, which I think is compromised these days. But equally, we've got to be careful about alternative media, or you end up with very radical sites, like you say, that might get circulated on. Conspiracy theories and craziness. So what do we do? How do we get journalism back on track?
We don't. It's over, man. It's done.
It's over.
Look, the way the internet works, there's an infinite number of channels. So what's going to happen? I'll put it this way. Two people decide to start news companies. One person says, I'm going to make really beautifully perfect news objective. The other person says, I'm just going to tell people what they want to hear. Well, guess who gets more views? The person B. They're just going to tell you what you want to hear. So here's what happens. After a month, person A, doing real news, gets 100 views. Person B gets 1,000 views. A year goes by. Person A has got 1 million views, and person B has got 15 million views. An investor comes along and says, million views, that's nothing. 15 million views. How about I give you more money to expand? And there you go. You end up with companies. Well, I won't call anybody out specifically, but you look at these digital media companies, right, that grew fast, got a ton of investment. I'll give you some examples. Vice, Vox, Mashable, BuzzFeed. They grew, exploded because they were willing to say what people wanted to hear. They were willing to focus on opinion more than fact. And the companies that want to produce real news, they can't exist. I mean, I should say, I think Mashable did a really good job for a while, and they're being punished for it, right? They're They're desperate to sell. They sell to Ziff Davis. They're laying people off. And you look at some of these other companies that just push a narrative that do really well. Now, it's not absolute. It doesn't work for everybody, right? There is market saturation. And I think we might be facing the back end of this because now we're seeing all these digital media companies starting to fail. They're missing revenue targets. Yeah. They're worried. Their valuations are dropping. You can only try and push a narrative for so long till people just get sick of hearing it. So maybe it'll start to come back and people will start to try and fill the hole in the market. I think my success comes from the fact that news became so saturated with nonsense that when I started doing my, for the most part, boring walking around and pointing at stuff, people are like, oh, thank God it's boring because I'm so sick of hearing a narrative.
Yeah.
You know, but I don't know. I guess we'll see what happens, man. I'm not optimistic.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. And sort of then just the final question is, how do we as, let's imagine, all right, that I have been pre-programmed to be lulled into that. We'll tell you what you want to hear. And I go and I get my news from the one source that whispers the sweet nothings in my ear that I want to hear deep down in my soul. How do I break that programming and start to discern a bit more about what media I consume? Is there a way to sort of break that loop?
If you can recognize it's already broken. The challenge is people who are in that loop can't break out unless someone pulls them out. The problem there is that people who are on the right are antagonistic to people on the left, and people on the left are antagonistic to people on the right. So there are some things the left is correct about, there are some things the right is correct about, and both sides are too busy hitting each other in the face, like, you know, satisfying their emotions, so, you know, they can't actually solve the problem and enlighten anyone. So you need to find these, you know, if you know anybody, this is what you need to do. You need to find people who don't do research, who just believe whatever the mainstream media says. They sit down. Look, you know, when I sat down to dinner and someone told me Sweden was a utopia, I just Google searched right away and I'm like, read that story. And what was it? It was a story about a woman who was gang raped in a stairwell by like a dozen guys, and they're like, whoa. And I'm like, yeah, look through the Google list and there's a ton of stories. And then they're like, wow, I'm wrong. Like I can't, you know. Some people refuse to believe it and they're like, this is fake news. I won't believe this. But when people who don't read the news for the first time see a Google search and they see all of the counterpoints, the fact that they're wrong, most people I know just go like, whoa, I didn't know that. I'm like, there you go. So maybe the solution is just try and help people that that don't pay attention, you know, be nice to people because no one's going to want to listen to you if you're a dick, you know.
Must be exhausting to have to help all these people, unfortunately. But look, so we'll wrap up on that point. But I just wanted to ask as well, because all your information will be on the overlay, so people know where to follow you if they don't already. And I urge people to do so, especially if you're interested in technology. A lot of stuff we didn't get to talk about. You know, Tim's done some great work on cryptocurrency. He explained it to an older guy like me who doesn't know what the fuck's going on with that shit, and certainly didn't make any money on it because I thought it was a Ponzi scheme dressed up. But whatever, that's again another topic for another show. But what are you working on? What's the next big project?
Right now, just, you know, my YouTube's my main thing. I do a video every day. I've got my second channel that I started, you know, last month, which is kind of just more personal opinion on things that don't matter. So it's like, it's political, but my second channel typically is if someone talks to me on Twitter and we have an argument, I'll address it. So aside from my YouTube, I'm going to be hiring somebody, and we're planning on doing a documentary about colleges and expression. So it's really early. Once we have a definitive plan, I'm probably going to do a fundraiser and try and raise some money to go and produce something. And this time, different from the Sweden, is I'm actually going to be hiring somebody full-time. You know, I worked with Emily last time, and that was kind of just a part-time thing, and we didn't have anything hammered out. But now it's tentative, but Emily is probably going to be officially coming to New York and working full-time, like specifically on just these projects. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully we can get that started after around the end of January, because the holidays kill everything. And a lot of people nobody wants to do interviews and do work in January. It's just terrible. But we're going to start pushing as soon as we can. So that's going to be fun.
Awesome. Well, hit me up when it's ready to go. I'll certainly put that out and promote that through my audience. Hope that helps. Because, I'm a big respecter of the work that you do. And it's very rare you find these neutral voices because, as you said, being neutral, generally it isn't profitable. You've got to be salacious, sensational. Yep. And certainly aligned to a tribe or faction. So there you have it, viewers. That was the great Tim Pool. Show him some love on social media. And that's it for the Richard Lewis Show. We're going to wrap up here. I don't know which guest we will have next because over the holiday period, people are sort of dipping in and out and being with relatives. And I totally understand and respect that. So we'll keep you posted. But until next time, take care of yourselves. We'll see you soon.